Most mornings, the wind woke him. But that morning, it was the stillness. Jack Rowan sat on the edge of his bunk, one boot on, one off, staring into the quiet like it owed him an answer. The Wyoming plains outside his window looked the same as they had for 20 years, flat, wide, eternal. But something felt wrong. Not the kind of wrong you could see, the kind that hovered just beneath your skin, like a thunderstorm holding its breath. He finished lacing his boots, slung on his flannel shirt, and stepped out into the dusty yard. The sun had just crept above the buttes to the east, painting long golden slashes across the hardpan. He scanned the ridge lines. Nothing moved. No coyotes, no deer, not even the lowing of his steers. Just silence, and that gnawed at him more than sound ever could. He saddled up out of habit, not urgency. It was fence-checking season anyway. He figured he'd ride the south line, the old part near the dry creek bed. Maybe the stillness would shake loose once he got moving. It usually did. But 10 minutes into the ride, just past the water trough by the boundary post, his gelding stiffened beneath him. Jack looked down. Something dark was slumped by the trough, unmoving. He dismounted, every sense narrowing. It looked like a bundle of rags at first. Then a leg shifted. Not human, animal, equine. He approached slowly. The shape didn't flinch. When he got close enough to see it clearly, Jack stopped dead. It was a horse, a mare. But she looked like no horse he'd ever seen. Her head was covered completely by a dirty burlap sack, cinched around the neck with twisted rope so tight it had bitten raw through the skin. Her ribs jutted like fence slats under a patchy, matted coat. Flies buzzed at the crusted wounds on her withers and hocks. She stood still, not out of calm, but because movement had clearly become unbearable. Jack swallowed hard. He'd seen neglected livestock before, but this wasn't neglect. This was ritual. Someone had done this with patience, precision. He took a slow step forward, murmuring low, "Easy, girl. I ain't here to hurt you." No response. No twitch. No snort. Just a low tremble in the knees like she expected a blow to follow every voice. When he reached for the knot, his hands were already shaking. The rope had been tied by someone who knew what they were doing. Tight enough to keep the sack on through struggle, but not enough to kill her. Methodical. Controlled. As the sack slipped away, Jack caught his first look at her face. Her left eye was swollen shut. The right, one bloodshot and dull, blinking slowly in the morning light, as if it didn't recognize daylight anymore. Her muzzle was scraped raw, crusted with dried blood. The smell of rot and old sweat rose like steam. Jack stepped back, fists clenched. This was no accident, no stray. This was a message or a challenge. He loosened the rope from her neck and let it fall to the dirt. The mare didn't bolt. Didn't even move. She just stood there, blinking slowly, legs locked like stone. Jack looked around. There were no boot prints nearby, but the dirt near the trough told a different story. Fresh hoof prints. 4 sets. Deep and recent. Not his cattle, riders. He followed the tracks with his eyes. They led up toward the west ridge, disappearing into the sun glare. And then he saw it, a faint glint off glass, too still and deliberate to be natural. Someone was watching him. Not yesterday. Not last week. Now. Jack turned back to the mare. She hadn't moved, but her eye followed him now, just barely. A flicker of something lived there, something faint and hard to name. Not trust, hope. He took the lead rope from his saddle horn and clipped it under her chin. She didn't resist, but each step she took was agony. Her hooves were grotesquely overgrown, curling at the ends like claws. Whoever had done this hadn't just wanted to hurt her, they wanted her to suffer. and worse, they wanted her to stay put while she did. Jack led her back to the barn in silence, each step digging something deeper into his chest. The kind of quiet fury that burns slow and never goes out. Inside, he cleared the corner stall, laid down a thin blanket, and helped the mare lower herself to the ground. She moved like her joints were full of glass. He fetched clean water, some oats. She sniffed both, suspicious, then took a tentative sip. It made him want to cry, though he didn't. He hadn't in years. Not since Charlotte died. She would have raised hell if she'd seen this. Would have marched straight into town and named names, no matter who was listening. She used to say things like, "Monsters don't need masks out here. They hide behind land titles and church pews." She'd been right, as always. Jack cleaned the wounds slowly, speaking low as he worked. Not because he thought the mare would understand, but because rage needed a direction, and his hands needed to remember how to help, not hurt. When he brushed away a thick smear of dried blood from the mare's flank, he saw it beneath the grime, a half-burned brand. The scar was fresh enough to have been made in the last week. The letter wasn't full, but it looked like the start of an L. Jagged. Rushed, sloppy branding intended to obscure, not mark. Jack stared at it for a long time. He knew that brand. Or more accurately, he knew who used to own it. He stood slowly, walked to the barn door, and stared out across the open plain. The sun was higher now, but the chill in his spine hadn't eased. He thought he'd left behind the kind of world where people tortured animals to send a message. He thought maybe, just maybe, solitude had made him invisible. But someone was trying to drag him back in. Someone powerful. Someone who thought Jack Rowan wouldn't say a word. And for the past 20 years, maybe they were right. But not this time. The next morning brought a wind out of the north, dry and needling, the kind that whispered through chinks in barnwood and tugged at memories you'd rather leave buried. Jack stood at the edge of the paddock, one hand wrapped around a mug of bitter black coffee, the other resting lightly on the top rail. The mare, still nameless, still unsure lay, curled in the straw inside the stall, her breathing slow but steady now. She'd made it through the night. Barely. Jack hadn't slept. He'd kept vigil just outside the stall, a pitchfork across his lap and a rifle within reach. The glint on the ridge yesterday hadn't returned, but the feeling it left behind did. Someone had left that mare here knowing exactly what it would mean. It hadn't been a careless dump. It had been a move in a game, a calculated dare. And Jack Rowan had taken the bait. The rising sun filtered through the barn slats as he stepped inside, knees creaking, eyes gritty with fatigue. The mare stirred slightly, then stilled again. Her good eye followed him, not with trust, but with recognition. That was new. Jack knelt beside her. Beneath the dried mud and sweat along her flank, the scarred brand had become clearer under yesterday's washings, a burned over letter, shaped roughly like an L. It wasn't a ranch brand anymore, it was a mutilated signature, an attempt to erase ownership. He knew who used it. Jeb Langston. A man who controlled more than land in these parts. He controlled silence, owned cattle, contracts, and just enough fear to keep lawmen tame and neighbors looking the other way. His hands never touched the cruelty themselves. He didn't have to. That's what men like Clint Maddox were for. Jack's jaw tightened. He'd known Clint since before either of them had gray in their beards. But over the years, Clint had traded friendship for influence, and influence for immunity. Now, he was Langston's fixer-smiling handshake on the front porch. Blunt object out behind the barn. Jack stepped back outside and tossed the dregs of his coffee onto the dirt. The day was just beginning, but the weight in his chest said otherwise. By mid-morning, the first visitor came. Jack heard the low hum of tires on gravel long before the truck came into view. He leaned against the porch post, watching the dust trail creep up the driveway like a warning. The white pickup that appeared was polished, newer than anything Jack owned. Clint Maddox stepped out, boots clean, smile already in place. "Well, hell, Jack," he called out, spreading his arms like they were still back in their rodeo days. "Didn't expect to see your name come up this week." Jack didn't answer. Didn't invite him up, just waited. Clint adjusted the brim of his hat, eyes flicking toward the barn. "Word is you found yourself a stray. Big one, mean-looking, no papers." Jack's voice was flat. "I find a lot of things on my land." "That so?" Clint's smile didn't fade, but his tone sharpened by a hair. "Funny thing, a horse like that, rough shape or not, could still be valuable. Could even be missed." Jack didn't blink. Not by anyone decent. A pause, just long enough to hang something unspoken between them. "Well," Clint said, stepping back toward his truck, "if you do come across any lost animals, real valuable types, you let someone know. Wouldn't want you holding on to something you shouldn't. Could be misunderstandings." He dropped something in Jack's mailbox on the way out. Jack waited until the dust cleared before opening it. Inside was a single spent bullet casing, polished, clean, resting on a folded scrap of paper with one line in block letters, "You know better." By sundown, Jack had reinforced every gate, double barricaded the barn doors, and brought the rifle into the house. This was no warning. It was a leash being thrown over his neck. He didn't sleep that night either. The next morning, he saddled up and rode into town. Rock Hollow hadn't changed. Same sagging sidewalks, same storefronts pretending not to rot behind the paint. But now, every eye he passed seemed to hold something behind it. Recognition, sympathy, or just the fear that whatever dust Jack was kicking up might blow back on them. He tied his horse near the chapel and stepped inside the one place where voices still told the truth. Father Boone sat at the far end of the pews, hunched beneath the weight of a robe and a half-century of holding other people's pain. His head lifted as Jack approached. "Didn't expect you back in this building, Jack." Jack sat. "Didn't expect to need to be." Boone nodded slowly, like he'd already guessed most of the story. "Langston?" Jack's jaw tightened. Boone sighed. "He's a disease, son. People think if they ignore the coughing, they won't get sick. That's how he survives. Quiet kills. I'm not interested in surviving," Jack said. "I'm interested in stopping it." The priest looked at him for a long time. Then he reached into the pocket of his coat and handed Jack a slip of paper. "She works the outer counties, doesn't take sides, doesn't scare easy. You'll need her." The name was scribbled in faded ink. Dr. Elise Monroe. Veterinarian, mobile unit. Jack frowned. "You sure she'll come?" "If you tell her what's been done," Boone said softly, "she won't have a choice." That night, back at the ranch, Jack stood on the porch watching dusk bleed into the hills. A patrol car passed the turnoff to his drive, slowed, then kept rolling. Deputy Carl Renner. Not checking on him, just checking. The silence hadn't ended, but it was changing shape. There were eyes on his fences now, boots in the tall grass. And somewhere up on that ridge, maybe behind a pair of binoculars or a rifle scope, someone was still waiting for him to break. Jack walked back to the barn and lit the lantern inside. The mare raised her head as the warm light reached her. Her eye still held pain, but it no longer looked empty. He knelt beside her. "They think I'll do nothing," he said quietly. "Same way I always have." His fingers gently brushed the scarred brand on her side. but they forgot what happens when a man runs out of reasons to stay silent. The truck arrived just after noon, rolling through the dust in a straight line like it knew exactly where it was going. Jack had been in the barn, rinsing dried blood from the mare's flank, when he heard the gravel crunch under new tires' foreign tread that hadn't touched his land before. He set the bucket down slowly. She stepped out before the engine stopped. Tall, broad-shouldered, her coat marked with sun and years, not fashion. A leather vet's bag hung off one shoulder, scuffed and worn from real work, not pretense. She didn't wait for permission, didn't hesitate. Just walked straight toward the barn. Jack watched her approach, hand never leaving the post where his rifle leaned. But something about her said she wasn't here to take. She was here because someone had to be. Her eyes scanned everything in one sweep fence line, roof line, his posture, the way the mare shifted in the stall as the new scent drifted in. She didn't flinch at the smell of rot, or at the sight of the old horse whose body told 100 stories too cruel to speak aloud. She moved with the practiced certainty of someone who'd patched wounds in the field on things with names, and things people had long stopped naming. She didn't ask if she could approach, just rolled up her sleeves and knelt beside the mare, hands already moving. The barn quieted. Even the wind outside seemed to wait. She examined the hooves first, fingers trailing the cracked keratin with reverent focus. Then the flanks. Then the neck. Her breath caught when she reached the scarred brand. Her shoulders stiffened. She didn't speak, but something in her body said it loud enough. This wasn't neglect. This was engineering. Someone had shaped this pain with time and purpose. She stood, wiped her hands on a rag, and looked at Jack like they both knew exactly what this meant, though neither needed to say it. She didn't ask who had done it. The question was obsolete. What mattered now was who would let it continue. He led her outside as the mare settled back into the straw, more alert now than she'd been in days. There was a pulse in her again, faint but rising like a campfire coaxed from wet wood. The ridge was empty. No glint of glass, no watching eyes, but the silence still pressed on them both like breath held too long. They stood near the porch for a while, no words, just the weight of knowing. He offered her water. She accepted. Neither drank. Then came the sound of tires again. A second vehicle, this one familiar in all the wrong ways. Black pickup, clean paint, tinted windows. Clint Maddox behind the wheel, his smile always 2 shades too polished. 2 men rode with him, unknown faces, but known types, the kind who stepped on bones like gravel. Jack didn't move from the porch. Elise remained beside the barn, one hand resting on the latch like she'd seen what kind of men needed doors between them and a reason. The truck stopped 20 feet away. Doors opened, boots landed. Clint spoke first, casual like someone already planning what to drink after. But Jack heard none of it. He watched the way the men moved, how one's fingers hovered near his belt, how the taller one scanned the windows of the house like he was measuring bullet paths. Elise stood straight, eyes unreadable, body still. When one of the strangers took a step forward, Jack stepped off the porch. He said nothing, only stood. The air shifted, one of those moments when violence isn't a sound, but a question waiting for an answer. Clint paused, studied Jack's face, studied the barn, studied Elise. Then, without a single demand, without a single raised voice, he turned and walked back to the truck. The others followed, their exit as smooth as their arrival, but the silence they left behind settled like ash. Jack watched the dust rise behind them. Elise didn't ask who they were. She didn't need to. Back inside the barn, the mare drank water for the first time since morning. Later, Jack sat on the floor outside her stall, his back against the post, hands rough and idle in the dirt. Elise sat opposite him, unrolling gauze by lantern light. her face tired but focused. No one said anything for a long time. Outside, coyotes called across the ridge. Farther off, an owl answered. The sky held no stars, just a heavy kind of gray that pressed everything closer to the ground. Inside that barn, 3 living things rested, one barely alive, one quietly breaking, and one, for the first time in years, remembering why some wounds are worth attending, even when healing might never come. Hope isn't always loud. Sometimes it enters like this with no announcement, no proof, just the simple fact that someone came and stayed, not for the fight, but for what the fight was trying to protect. The night broke in silence, as if even the wind dared not whisper. Jack had fallen asleep in the worn-out rocker by the barn window, his Winchester laid across his lap like a warning. Inside the barn, Hope slept standing up, her breathing steady but shallow. Elise had spent hours tending her wounds again, wiping dried blood, checking for signs of infection. Jack had offered to keep watch. Not that she asked, but something in his bones told him this night wouldn't pass quietly. The first thing he felt was the shift in the air, an unnatural stillness, too complete. Then came the faintest crunch of a boot on gravel. Jack's eyes opened slowly. Another sound, not 1, 3. Steps, careful and measured. He moved silently, slipping into his boots and ghosting towards the door. Then the flames erupted. A wall of fire ignited outside the barn lantern oil and dry hay, the oldest and dirtiest trick in the book. Jack burst through the side door as shadows danced across the yard, and he caught sight of 3 masked figures sprinting away, one of them limping badly. He didn't waste time on pursuit. He grabbed the water barrels and started shouting. "Elise," he bellowed, "we got fire!" She was already moving barefoot, hair tied back, face sharp with adrenaline. Together, they doused the flames before the barn caught fully. Smoke still curled through the air, a ghost of what might have been. Hope was safe. Shaken, but safe. One of the attackers hadn't gotten far. Jack found him crumpled near the fence line, moaning and clutching his knee, twisted at a wrong angle. The mask was gone, the face was young, maybe 20, but the eyes held guilt like rust. "Don't kill me," he gasped. "Give me a reason not to," Jack said flatly, barrel lowered at the man's chest. Elise appeared behind him, her breath still ragged. "Don't," she said gently. "Let's hear what he has to say." The boy spilled it all before they asked. "Renner sent me. Said just to torch the place and run. Didn't know there was a damn vet inside." "You knew what was in that barn," Jack growled. "You knew what that fire would do. He said no one would get hurt just to scare. But then Langston's boys brought the saddle." Jack froze. "What saddle?" The boy pointed toward the edge of the barn, where something had been dropped in the panic. A branded Langston Ranch saddle. Too clean, too deliberate. The fire wasn't just a threat, it was evidence control. Jack tied the boy up in the old feed room and double-checked the locks. Elise stood over the saddle, her brow furrowed. "They wanted the barn to burn," she whispered. "Not to kill the horse, to erase her, erase everything." "And pin it on me," Jack said bitterly. "Burnt body, branded saddle, all neat and clean." Elise didn't argue. She reached for her scanner, the one Sam had delivered earlier that morning. She hovered it near Hope's shoulder. A soft beep answered. The screen lit up. "Found her," Elise said. "U.S. property, serial 1408921. Part of a military remount program decommissioned 6 months ago." Jack stared. "She's government?" "Yeah," Elise murmured. "And this changes everything." By sunrise, Sam Boone arrived, dust-covered and sharp-eyed. She barely had time to speak before Jack handed her a letter wrapped in oilskin. "Take this to Judge Wallace. Don't stop. Don't talk to anyone. Ride fast." "What is it?" Sam asked. "Proof, 1As, timelines, pictures Elise pulled from the chip's archive." Sam nodded once, eyes fierce. "You think he'll help?" "If he sees it, he will." As Sam rode off, Jack turned back to the barn. Elise was bandaging the boy's ankle now, not because he deserved it, but because she still believed in decency, even after this. That night, the moon hung like a blade in the sky. Jack stayed awake again. Winchester loaded, boots laced. When the sound of hooves came this time, it wasn't secretive. Langston had arrived. More than a dozen riders formed a crescent at the edge of Jack's field. Lanterns flickered in their hands. At the front, Langston sat high in his saddle like a man surveying land he thought already his. "You ready to come to your senses, Rowan?" he called out. "I'll take the horse and be gone by sunup. You keep your land, keep your little vet, keep your silence." Jack stepped forward into the open. "You bring fire to my land again, Langston?" Langston smiled. "Only if you give me a reason." Jack cocked his head. "I got federal proof this time. That horse belongs to the U.S. government. That's not a game you can buy your way out of." Langston's grin didn't fade, but his eyes chilled. "What I can't buy, I bury." Elise emerged from the barn then, standing beside Jack. She didn't say anything, didn't need to. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of scorched wood and blood still drying in the dirt. Langston looked her over with thinly veiled contempt. "Vet," he spat. "Hope your license can save your skin." Jack raised the Winchester slowly, not aiming yet, just reminding. Last man threatened her lost a knee. Langston gave a tight nod, the kind that promised retribution with interest. "Then I suppose I'll see you both again soon." And just like that, they turned and rode off into the dark. Back inside the barn, Elise sat beside Hope, gently brushing her mane. Jack leaned on the doorframe, watching the mare nuzzle against Elise's sleeve. "This ain't over," he said. "No," she agreed. "But we bought time." Jack looked toward the horizon, where the riders had vanished into dust. "Next time, they won't bring torches." Elise met his eyes. "Then we bring the truth and a judge." Hope shifted in the stall, letting out a quiet sound, half pain, half defiance. And Jack understood. The fight was no longer just about a horse. It was about who still got to own silence in this town, and who was finally done being quiet. The hum of engines cut through the morning fog like a warning bell. Jack stood at the edge of his porch, boots planted firm on the wooden planks, as 3 black SUVs crawled up the dirt road to his ranch. The tires kicked up pale Wyoming dust, and behind the windshield of the lead vehicle, Jack caught the stoic profile of Judge Wallace. He didn't say anything, just tightened his grip on the rifle resting against the banister. Inside the barn, Elise stepped into view, wiping her hands on a towel streaked with iodine. The mare, no longer just a case, but now a cause, stood steady in her stall. Her eyes followed Elise with quiet trust. The bruises across her ribs had begun to fade, but the fire in her had just begun to spark. The vehicle stopped. Doors opened. Marshal Graves stepped out first, followed by 2 agents. Judge Wallace brought up the rear, dust trailing his long coat. "You Jack Rowan?" Wallace asked, his voice a low, practiced gravel. Jack gave a single nod. "That's right." Wallace didn't shake hands. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded affidavit. "Got a call from your girl," he said, tilting his head toward Sam Boone, who stood quietly beside the barn's water tank. "Said you had something that couldn't wait." "We do," Elise replied, stepping forward. "It's in the barn." Wallace followed her without question. When he stepped inside, he stopped mid-stride, mid-thought. The mare lifted her head. Her right flank still bore the shadow of a mutilated brand. Her hooves were cracked and mangled. Her ribs protruded slightly despite the feed Jack had poured into her every day. "She doesn't belong to any ranch in Wyoming," Elise said, lifting a portable scanner Sam had delivered earlier that week. She passed it gently across the mare's shoulder. A beep. Serial code appeared on the screen. Elise turned it toward the judge. "Federal property," she said. "One of 12 horses stolen from a defunct military remount program out of Fort Bridger. This one was supposed to be decommissioned, rehomed. Instead, someone took her, broke her, and tried to burn her with the barn." Wallace's jaw tensed. "You're sure?" "I pulled backup data from the chip," Elise said. "Timestamps, logs. She's not just a stolen horse, she's evidence." Jack gestured to the young man tied to a support beam, still nursing a wound on his thigh. "And he's the one who lit the match." The man didn't try to lie, didn't beg either. He just looked tired. "It was Langston," he muttered. "Said she was marked too clean. Said she could talk if someone looked close enough. Told me to torch her, make it look like Jack stole her." Wallace turned slowly to face Jack. "You realize what you're sitting on here?" Jack gave a slow nod. "I do now." The judge folded his hands behind his back. "We move now. No warnings. No deals. I want Jeb Langston in cuffs before sundown." It didn't take long for the word to reach town. But Langston must have known it was coming. By the time marshals arrived at his estate, the house was empty, the grounds abandoned. What he didn't expect was Clint Maddox's truck to stall halfway across the county line right in front of a road crew that Sam Boone had personally diverted. "You're going to want to get out real slow, Mr. Maddox," one of the deputies said, voice thick with satisfaction. They found Langston 2 hours later in an old cabin near the canyon. He didn't resist, didn't speak, just stood in the doorway as if the walls were already collapsing behind him. When they cuffed him, the only thing he said was, "That damn horse." The courtroom in Cheyenne was cold and full. Press arrived from across the state. The case wasn't just about one stolen horse, it was about conspiracy, cruelty, and corruption threaded through Rock Hollow like barbed wire under dust. Elise testified first. She spoke clearly, no theatrics. Just facts, scars, burns, infections, what the chip revealed. Jack followed. His words were simple. "Quiet." "She was dumped in my yard like garbage," he said. "But she stood her ground. So I did too." Judge Wallace sat at the bench for that trial as well. He listened, he watched the photographs Elise had taken, and he didn't look away when the jury handed down its decision. Jeb Langston, guilty on all counts. Sentence, death. He didn't flinch. But Jack swore he saw something leave his eyes. Not fear, not shame. Just the recognition that whatever power he'd held, whatever fear he ruled with, was gone. Clint Maddox pleaded out. 10 years. No parole. The man who lit the fire testified and entered witness protection. Rock Hollow began to breathe again. In the weeks that followed, Elise opened a permanent veterinary clinic right beside Sam's feed store. They shared a roof, split the rent, and offered care on a sliding scale that made local ranchers blink twice in disbelief. Hope, the mare once left to die, had her own stall in Jack's barn. Her wounds had closed, her coat had darkened, and though her gait still bore the memory of pain, her head never hung low. Jack had stopped drinking, stopped shutting the doors to the old guest room. Some nights he'd walk out to the pasture just to watch Hope breathe. "She's not broken anymore," he said to Elise one afternoon as they stood shoulder to shoulder at the fence. Elise nodded. "Neither are you." Jack turned to her. "You ever wonder why she survived?" Elise smiled. "Because she wasn't ready to stop running." The final days of summer came with long shadows and golden light. The hills beyond the ranch rolled soft and green, and the wind brought the scent of sage and distant hay. Jack sat on the porch, coffee in one hand, a carved wooden horse in the other, unfinished but taking shape. Hope stood out in the pasture, tail flicking, ears alert. Then, with no warning, she broke into a full gallop, hooves pounding the earth like war drums. She circled the fence twice, then slowed, turning her head to look back at him. And for the first time in years, Jack didn't feel like something was missing. He felt whole. He felt free, just like her.